Boy buys a sick horse for $10, but the animal hides a secret. Tommy Walker Davis clutched the $10 tightly in his small, calloused hand, money he'd earned over months of selling fruit at the farmer's market in Pleasantville, deep in the heart of Kentucky. The 9-year-old boy's heart pounded as he stared at the skinny, wounded horse no one wanted to buy. The moment he first saw the animal, something strange happened. The horse, barely able to hold its head up, suddenly lifted its gaze and stared straight at him. Little Tommy felt a shiver run down his spine, as if the creature was trying to tell him something important. "Mom, I need to take this horse home," the boy said, tugging insistently at his mother's skirt. Sarah Davis stopped inspecting the chickens at the market and looked where her son was pointing. Her face paled at the sight of the pitiful animal. "Tommy, for heaven's sake, that poor thing is halfway to the grave. We barely have enough to feed ourselves, let alone care for a sick horse." "But Mom, look into his eyes, he's begging for help." Sarah sighed deeply. Ever since her husband Robert had passed 3 years ago, lost to pneumonia they couldn't treat in time, life had been a daily struggle. She worked as a seamstress at home, taking whatever odd jobs she could, but money was always tight. "Son, where on earth are you going to get the money to buy that horse?" Tommy opened his small hand, revealing 10 gleaming dollars. "I saved every penny from selling peaches and apples in the town square. 3 months of saving, Mom." Sarah's heart ached. She knew her son had gone hungry more than once to save that money, always claiming he wasn't hungry when there wasn't enough food for both of them. The horse's owner, Hank, a sun-worn man in his 60s from the dusty plains, was trying to convince anyone to take the animal. "This here was a fine horse once," he said. "Just a little worn down now. Anyone who takes him for $5 is getting a steal." "I'll give you 10, Tommy said, stepping forward. Hank looked at the boy in surprise. $10? Boy, you sure about that? This horse might not last the week." "I'm sure, sir." Sarah tried to object, but when she saw the determination in her son's eyes, something inside her gave way. Maybe it was the same stubbornness his father had, always believing he could save any injured animal he found. The deal was done quickly. Tommy handed over his $10 and received an old rope as a halter. The horse was officially his. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to us just starting out. Now back to the tale. Getting the horse home was an adventure in itself. The animal could barely walk, stopping every few feet to rest. Tommy walked beside him, whispering words of encouragement. "Easy there, big fella. We'll be home soon and you'll feel better." The horse, its grey coat marred by old wounds, had a tangled mane and ribs so sharp they hurt just to look at. But there was something in its deep brown eyes, a quiet intelligence, as if it carried important secrets. When they reached the small backyard of their humble home, Sarah shook her head in dismay. "Tommy, where's this horse going to sleep? We don't have a barn." "Under the oak tree, Mom. I'll make him a cover with some old planks." The first night was rough. The horse trembled badly and seemed feverish. Tommy couldn't sleep, spending the whole night by its side, cooling its forehead with damp cloths. It was during those first hours tending to the horse that the boy noticed something strange. When he whistled a tune his grandfather William used to whistle before passing on to a better life, the horse would immediately calm down and stop trembling. "How interesting," he murmured to himself. "How do you know Grandpa's song?" The next morning, while examining the animal's wounds more closely to clean them, Tommy discovered something that puzzled him. On the right hind leg, there was a peculiar mark that didn't look like an ordinary wound. It was shaped like a horseshoe but upside down, as if someone had done it on purpose. "Mom, come look at this." Sarah approached and studied the mark. "How odd. I've never seen anything like it. It looks like someone branded him on purpose." Just then, Mrs. Margaret, the 75-year-old neighbor who lived next door, appeared in the yard carrying a bowl of water. "I brought fresh water for the poor thing," she said, walking closer. When her eyes landed on the horse's leg mark, Mrs. Margaret dropped the bowl, spilling all the water. "Good heavens," she whispered, clutching her chest. "What's wrong, Mrs. Margaret? Are you feeling unwell?" asked Sarah, concerned. Where did you get this horse? Tommy bought it at Hank's farmer's market. Why do you ask? Mrs. Margaret fell silent for a few seconds, as if wrestling with herself over what to say. That mark, I've seen it before, a long time ago. Where, Mrs. Margaret? At Richard Morgan's farm, but that was over 15 years ago. The mention of Richard Morgan's farm sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Everyone in town knew that man, owner of the best land in the region and notorious for being ruthless in business. What farm is that? Tommy asked, curious. A big property, way out on the edge of town. Mr. Richard is a powerful man, but he hasn't always been honest in his dealings, Mrs. Margaret said, lowering her voice as if someone might be listening. Mrs. Margaret, are you implying something? I can't say for sure, Sarah, but that mark, that's how the late William used to brand his horses. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt her legs go weak. William was her father-in-law, Tommy's grandfather, who had passed on to a better life 10 years ago. What do you mean, Mrs. Margaret? My father-in-law never had horses with that mark. Oh, but he did, dear. William had 3 horses with that upside-down brand. Said it was to identify them if anyone tried to steal them. No one would ever suspect an inverted horseshoe mark was intentional. Tommy stared at the horse with wide eyes. So, this horse might have been my grandpa's? Could be, child, but that was a long time ago and a lot's happened since then. That afternoon, Sarah couldn't focus on her sewing. Mrs. Margaret's words echoed in her mind. Was it possible this sick, abandoned horse had some connection to her late father-in-law? Tommy, meanwhile, was more determined than ever to care for the animal. If there was even a small chance this horse had belonged to his grandfather, he'd do everything in his power to save it. Over the next few days, the boy developed a strict care routine. He woke before sunrise to give the horse fresh water, gently cleaned its wounds, and always whistled Grandpa's tune when the animal seemed restless. Slowly, the horse began to show signs of improvement. The wounds were healing, and it could stand for longer periods. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Sarah made a disturbing discovery. While sorting through her husband's old clothes in the trunk, she found a small box she'd never seen before. Inside it were several letters yellowed with time. With trembling hands, she opened the first one. It was in the handwriting of her father-in-law, William, addressed to his son, Robert, her late husband. My dear son Robert, if you're reading this letter, it means something has happened to me. I need you to know the truth about what happened at Richard Morgan's farm. That man took advantage of my trust and stole everything that was mine, including my 3 horses. I hold on to the hope that one day justice will be served and our family will reclaim what's rightfully ours. If anything happens to me, I want my grandson, Tommy Walker, to know there's a special horse, Thunder, who was my favorite. He has an upside-down horseshoe mark on his right hoof. If you ever find that horse, know he's the key to proving everything I'm saying in this letter. Sarah Davis had to sit down. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the letter. Her father-in-law had written about the very same horse that was now in her backyard. Quickly, she opened the other letters. There were documents, receipts, even a deed for land William had bought back then. Everything proved he had once owned property that now belonged to Richard Morgan. "Tommy!" she called, her voice choked. The boy came running, still dirty from tending to the horse. "What is it, Mum?" "I need to show you something very important." Sarah explained everything she'd discovered in the letters. Tommy listened carefully, and with every word his eyes shone brighter. "So Thunder really belonged to Grandpa?" "Seems so, son. But this is going to bring us a lot of trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Mr. Richard Morgan isn't a man to be trifled with. If he finds out we have the horse and these papers, he'll do anything to take it all from us." As if fate had been listening, right at that moment, someone knocked on the door. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Mrs. Sarah Davis," said a gruff voice outside. Sarah and Tommy exchanged fearful glances. When she opened the door, she was met with a tall, well-dressed man in his 50s, wearing a leather hat and expensive boots. "That's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Richard Morgan. I'm a farmer here in the area. I heard you all bought a horse at the farmer's market yesterday." Sarah's heart raced, but she tried to stay calm. "We did. Is there a problem?" "That horse was stolen from my property a few years back. I need y'all to return him." "Stolen?" But we bought him from Hank at the market. It was all legal. Richard Morgan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Hank had no right to sell that animal. He worked for me and ran off with several horses. That one's among them. Tommy, who had been listening behind his mother, stepped forward. That horse ain't yours, Mr. Morgan. He belonged to my grandpa. Your grandpa? Richard scoffed. Boy, your grandpa's been gone for years, and when he worked for me, all the horses were mine. That ain't true, Tommy shot back with a courage he didn't know he had. Sarah pulled her son back, afraid he'd say too much. Mr. Morgan, with all due respect, we bought that horse fair and square. If you got a complaint, you need to take it up with Hank. Mrs. Davis, I'll be straight with you. That horse is worth a lot of money, more than y'all can imagine. If you don't hand him over willingly, I'll have to take other measures. What measures? You live in a rented house, don't you? I can talk to the landlord. You do sewing work? I can talk to your clients. You see where I'm going with this? The threat was clear. Richard Morgan was willing to ruin their lives if he didn't get what he wanted. You can't do this, said Sarah Davis, but her voice came out weak. Yes, I can, and I will, if I have to. I'm giving you 3 days to decide. Either return the horse to me or I'll make your lives a living hell. After Richard Morgan left, Sarah and Tommy sat in silence for long minutes. Mom, we can't give Thunder to that man. Son, you don't understand the situation. That man could destroy our lives. But the horse is rightfully ours. Grandpa's letters prove it. Prove it? Tommy, that man has money and power. Your grandfather's letters might mean nothing against him. That night, Sarah barely slept. She knew she was facing an impossible choice. Hand over the horse and accept the injustice, or stand up to a powerful man who could destroy everything she had built. Tommy, from the backyard, watched Thunder. The horse was clearly doing better, able to stand without difficulty and even take a few steps. You understand what's happening, don't you, buddy? He whispered to the animal. That man wants to take you back, but I won't let him. To his surprise, the horse moved closer and nuzzled his shoulder as if trying to comfort him. You know you belong to our family, right? That's why you got better so fast. The next morning, Tommy woke up determined. No matter what happened, he wouldn't let anyone take Thunder. He decided to seek help, and the first person he thought of was Mrs. Margaret. The elderly neighbor had always been kind to him and seemed to know more about the horse's history. Mrs. Margaret, I need your help, he said, knocking on her door. Come in, boy. What's wrong? Tommy told her everything about Richard Morgan's visit and the letters his mother had found. Mrs. Margaret listened quietly, shaking her head several times. I knew this day would come, she finally said. What do you mean? Boy, your grandfather William was my friend. He told me everything that happened with Richard Morgan before he passed. He told you what? That Richard took advantage of a hard time to take his land and horses. Your grandfather was sick, needed money for treatment, and Richard offered to help. But it was really a loan with impossible interest. And then? When your grandfather couldn't pay, Richard took everything. Land, horses, even the house your grandfather lived in. That's robbery. Yes, boy, but it was all done legally. Richard is clever. He knew exactly how to work things without breaking the law. But my grandfather's letters... The letters might help, but you'll need more than that. You'll need witnesses. Witnesses? People who saw what happened back then, and I'm one of them. Tommy felt hope rising in his chest. Would you be willing to tell the truth? Of course I would. It's about time justice was served for your grandfather. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That afternoon, Mrs. Margaret went to Sarah's house to talk about the situation. Sarah, you need to know there are people in town who will support you, the elderly woman said. Richard Morgan has done plenty of wrong over the years, and many families have suffered because of him. But Mrs. Margaret, he has so much power, who'd want to pick a fight with him? You'd be surprised. Take Miss Rebecca, for example. She's always stood against the injustices in this town. Miss Rebecca was a 45-year-old woman who had taught at the local school for over 20 years. She was respected by everyone and known for her honesty. Do you think she'd help us? There's only one way to find out, said Tommy. The next day, the three of them went to school to talk to teacher Rebecca. When she heard the story, she was outraged. "This is outrageous. We can't let this man keep doing these awful things." "But teacher, what can we do?" asked Sarah Davis. "First, we need to gather all the evidence we can. Your father-in-law's letters are important, but we'll need more." "What kind of evidence?" "Documents from that time, witnesses, anything that proves William really owned the horse." "And how are we going to get that?" "Leave it to me. I'll talk to the folks at City Hall, see if they have old records. And I'll also speak with others who knew your father-in-law." Over the next week, teacher Rebecca worked tirelessly to gather information. She discovered records at City Hall from when William had registered his horses, including one with the exact description of the upside-down horseshoe brand. She also found other people who remembered that time and were willing to testify for the family. Meanwhile, Tommy kept taking care of Thunder, who improved every day. The horse could now trot around the yard and responded to the boys' commands as if they'd known each other for years. It was during one of these moments caring for the horse that Tommy decided to try something. He remembered his grandfather used to teach tricks to horses and wondered if Thunder remembered any. "Thunder, sit," he said, using a command he'd seen his grandfather use with other animals as a child. To his surprise, the horse immediately lowered itself onto its hind legs in a position that looked uncomfortable for an ordinary horse. "Good heavens," Tommy exclaimed, "you really remember." Excited, he tested other commands he recalled his grandfather using. "Thunder, bow." The horse lowered its head and bent its front legs as if making a curtsy. "Thunder, count to 3. The horse tapped its hoof 3 times, stopping exactly on the right number. Tommy was overjoyed. This was definitive proof the horse had belonged to his grandfather. Only William had known these specific commands. He ran inside to tell his mother. "Mom! Mom! You have to see what Thunder can do." Sarah rushed out and watched in amazement as the horse performed. "How is this possible?" "Because he really was Grandpa's. Only Grandpa taught his horses these tricks." Just then, Margaret appeared in the yard. "What's all this commotion?" When she saw Thunder's skills, Margaret began to cry. "It's really him," she said, emotional. "This is William's horse. I remember seeing him do these exact tricks." Sarah felt they finally had the proof they needed, but one problem remained: how to face Richard Morgan. The answer came from where they least expected it. At the end of the week, teacher Rebecca arrived at their house with a man in his 60s they didn't know. "Sarah, this is Mr. Jeffrey, a lawyer from town. I explained everything to him, and he offered to help you." Mr. Jeffrey was a retired attorney who had decided to take on special cases for free, especially those involving social injustices. "Mrs. Davis, I've reviewed the documents teacher Rebecca showed me, and I believe you have a strong case," he said. "You really think so?" "I do. The City Hall records prove your father-in-law was the rightful owner of the horse, and the witnesses we've found will be crucial. But what about Richard Morgan's influence? Money means nothing when the truth is on our side. We'll face him legally. And what if he carries out his threats? Threats like that are illegal. If he tries to harm you just because of this, he'll be committing another offense." Tommy, who was listening to the conversation, felt hopeful for the first time in days. "So we can keep Thunder?" "If we can prove everything properly, yes." In the following days, Mr. Jeffrey worked tirelessly on the case. He discovered there were other issues involving Richard Morgan and his questionable business practices. He also learned that Hank himself, who had sold the horse at the farmer's market, was willing to testify that he had found the animal abandoned on a property that didn't belong to Richard. Meanwhile, Richard Morgan wasn't idle. He began pressuring Sarah Davis in other ways. He spoke to the owner of the house where she lived, trying to convince her not to renew the lease. He also talked to some of her clients, suggesting she wasn't trustworthy. "Mom, you're losing work because of me," said Tommy, feeling guilty. "No, son, it's not your fault. It's that man's greed." "But if I give Thunder back..." "No, we won't give him up. Your grandfather fought his whole life for justice, and we're going to keep fighting." Sarah's determination surprised even herself. She had never imagined standing up to someone powerful, but the situation had awakened a strength she didn't know she had. A week later, Mr. Jeffrey proposed they hold a public meeting in the town square to settle the matter. It would be a sort of people's court. where both sides could present their cases and the townsfolk could hear the arguments. "A public meeting?" asked Sarah. "Will Richard agree to that?" "He won't have a choice. The pressure from the community will force him to participate, and he'll want to defend his reputation." Word of the meeting spread quickly through town. People were curious to learn the truth about the horse and the accusations against Richard Morgan. On the appointed day, the square was packed. It seemed like the whole town had shown up. Richard Morgan arrived with two well-dressed men, likely his lawyers. Sarah was nervous but determined. Tommy held her hand tightly. The town mayor, Mr. Andrew Cooper, agreed to mediate the meeting. "Folks, let's hear both sides of this story and try to reach a fair solution," he said. Richard Morgan spoke first. "Good people, the situation is simple. This horse was stolen from my property years ago by Hank, who worked for me at the time. I have documents proving the animal is mine." He showed some papers to the mayor. "These are records of the horses from my farm, including the one in question." Next, it was Mr. Jeffrey's turn to defend the family. "Gentlemen, what we have here is a clear case of historical injustice. William Walker, grandfather of young Tommy Walker Davis, was a victim of questionable business practices by Mr. Richard Morgan." He presented William's letters and town records. "These documents prove the horse in question originally belonged to Mr. William, later being wrongfully taken by Mr. Richard through a loan with predatory interest." The crowd murmured, clearly interested in both sides' arguments. "Furthermore," Mr. Jeffrey continued, "we have witnesses who saw what happened back then." Margaret stood up and told her version of events. Her voice trembled with emotion as she described how she'd seen William being forced to hand over his property to Richard. Then it was Hank's turn to speak. "I found that horse abandoned on land that doesn't belong to Mr. Richard," he said. "He was in terrible shape, nearly at death's door. I took care of him as best I could, and then brought him to the farmer's market, thinking maybe someone would want to give the animal a chance." Richard Morgan interrupted. "That's a lie. You were working for me when you ran off with my horses." "I did work for you, sir, but only for 2 months, and I found this horse far from your property." The tension in the town square was rising. People were clearly taking sides. That's when Mr. Jeffrey had an idea. "Mr. Mayor, I'd like to propose a test." "What kind of test?" "The boy, Tommy Walker Davis, claims the horse responds to specific commands only his grandfather knew. If that's true, it'll be proof the animal belonged to Mr. William." Richard Morgan scoffed. "That's ridiculous. Anyone can teach tricks to a horse." "So you accept the challenge?" asked Mr. Jeffrey. "I do. But when this nonsense goes nowhere, I want my horse back." The crowd stirred. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Tommy went to fetch Thunder, who was tied to a nearby oak tree. The horse looked magnificent, his coat gleaming and eyes alert. His recovery had been remarkable. "Folks, I'm going to ask Thunder to do some tricks my grandpa taught him," said Tommy, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Thunder, sit." The horse immediately lowered himself onto his hind legs. The crowd murmured in surprise. "Thunder, bow." The animal gracefully bent his head and folded his front legs. "Thunder, count to 5. The horse tapped his hoof 5 times, stopping right on the correct number. But Tommy wasn't done yet. He remembered a special command his grandpa used only with his favorite horse. "Thunder, show where it hurts." To everyone's astonishment, the horse lifted his right hind leg, revealing the exact spot with the upside-down horseshoe mark. The crowd erupted in applause. There was no denying this horse had a special bond with the Davis family. Richard Morgan was clearly shaken, but tried to keep his composure. "Anyone can teach those tricks," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. Then something unexpected happened. A man in his 50s stood up in the crowd. "I worked for Mr. Richard for 10 years, he announced, "and I need to tell the truth." Everyone turned to look at him. "My name's Joseph Carter, and I saw everything that happened back when Mr. William was around." Richard Morgan paled. "Joseph Carter, you don't know what you're talking about." "I do, boss. It's time for the truth." Joseph Carter stepped into the center of the square. Mr. William was an honest man who bred fine horses. When he got sick and needed money for treatment, Mr. Richard offered him a loan, but the interest was impossible to pay. "That has nothing to do with—" "It does," Joseph interrupted. Because when Mr. William couldn't pay, Mr. Richard not only took his land but also forged papers to claim the horses. A tense silence fell over the square. I saw Mr. Richard burn Mr. William's original documents and make new ones, listing himself as the sole owner of everything. Richard Morgan was visibly nervous. That's a serious accusation, said the mayor. It's the truth, and if needed, I can prove it. How? Because I kept copies of some original papers. I figured they might come in handy someday. The revelation caused an uproar. People began shouting, some defending Joseph Carter, others questioning his motives. Richard Morgan tried to regain control. This man was fired by me years ago. He's doing this out of spite. I was fired because I discovered your schemes and threatened to expose everything, Joseph Carter shot back. But now I'm not afraid anymore. Mr. Jeffrey stepped closer to Joseph Carter. Do you really have those documents? I do. They're kept at home in a safe. I can go get them right now if you want. The mayor consulted a few people from the community and decided it would be best to pause the meeting so the documents could be properly examined. Here's what we'll do, he said. Joseph Carter will go get the documents and tomorrow we'll meet again to review them. Richard Morgan was not happy with the decision. This is outrageous. You're taking the word of a man who was fired for dishonesty. Mr. Morgan, the mayor said firmly, if you have nothing to hide, there's no need to worry. That night, Sarah Davis, Tommy, and several others from the community gathered at Joseph Carter's house to examine the documents he had kept. What they found was shocking. Joseph Carter indeed had copies of original records proving that William had been the rightful owner of 3 horses, including one described exactly like Thunder. More than that, there were records of predatory loans and even drafts of forged documents in Richard Morgan's own handwriting. My goodness, said Mrs. Rebecca, this proves he really did forge documents. And not just with Mr. William, Joseph Carter added. He's done this to many people over the years. Mr. Jeffrey examined everything carefully. With this evidence, the case has completely changed. Now it's not just about the horse's ownership, it's about forgery and fraud. Tommy was emotional. So Thunder really is ours. More than that, son. Your grandfather may have been the victim of a huge scam, and now we can finally get justice. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, the town square was even more crowded than the day before. Word of the documents Joseph Carter had uncovered had spread quickly, and people from neighboring towns had come to see how things would unfold. Richard Morgan arrived with more lawyers, clearly trying to shield himself from the new accusations. The mayor opened the meeting by presenting the uncovered documents. After reviewing the materials provided by Mr. Joseph Carter, we found troubling evidence of irregularities in Mr. Morgan's dealings. The papers were passed around for everyone to examine. The reaction was one of widespread outrage. This proves my father-in-law was swindled, Sarah Davis said, her voice trembling with emotion. Richard Morgan tried to defend himself. These documents could have been forged by Joseph Carter himself. He had years to prepare this hoax. Mr. Morgan, Mr. Jeffrey said, these documents bear official stamps from that time and signatures that can be verified by experts. Plus, we have witnesses who confirm the facts. Several people stood up to confirm they remembered the events and that everything Joseph Carter had said was true. Mrs. Margaret was one of them. I remember seeing Mr. William crying when he had to give up the horses. He said he'd been tricked, but no one believed him because Mr. Morgan was a powerful man. Another resident, Mr. Frank, also gave his testimony. William was my friend. He told me everything that happened, but at the time I couldn't do anything to help. With each testimony, the pressure on Richard Morgan grew. His denials sounded weaker and less convincing by the minute. That's when Mr. Jeffrey made a proposal that surprised everyone. Mr. Richard, given the evidence presented, I propose an agreement. You acknowledge that the horse legally belongs to the Davis family, and in return, we won't take the forgery accusations to the proper authorities. Richard fell silent for long minutes, clearly weighing his options. And if I refuse? Then we'll have to involve the authorities and investigate all your transactions from the last 15 years. The threat was serious. If the authorities dug deep into Richard's dealings, they might uncover many other irregularities. "I need time to think," he finally said. "You have until tomorrow," replied Mr. Jeffrey. That afternoon, while waiting for Richard Morgan's decision, Tommy spent a long time with Thunder. The horse had fully recovered and seemed to understand something important was happening. "You know, buddy," the boy said, stroking the animal's neck, "no matter what happens, I want you to know I love you very much." The horse rested its head on the boy's shoulder, as if trying to comfort him. Sarah Davis watched the scene from the window, tears in her eyes. No matter the outcome, she was proud of the courage her son had shown. That evening, Mrs. Margaret came to visit them. "Son, your grandfather would be so proud of you," she told Tommy. "You think so?" "I'm sure of it. He always said justice would be served one day, and you made it happen." "We haven't won yet, Mrs. Margaret." "Oh, but you already have, because you proved that sometimes the little folks can stand up to the big ones and win." The next morning, everyone gathered again in the town square. Richard Morgan arrived alone, without the lawyers from the day before. He looked defeated and aged. "Folks," he said, addressing the crowd, "after much thought, I admit I've made mistakes in the past." A murmur spread through the crowd. The horse truly belonged to Mr. William Davis, and it was wrong of me to take it. Tommy couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Therefore," Richard continued, "I acknowledge the Davis family's right to the animal." The square erupted in applause. Sarah hugged her son tightly, both crying with emotion. But Richard wasn't finished. "What's more, I want to make amends for other wrongs I've done. I'll return the land that belonged to Mr. William to his family." This time, even Sarah couldn't stay on her feet. The land Richard was offering was worth a fortune. "Mr. Richard," she said, her voice trembling, "that's not necessary. We only want the horse." "It is necessary," he replied. "It's the only way I can make up for past mistakes." Mr. Jeffrey took charge of making everything official. The papers were signed right there, in front of the whole community, ensuring no doubts about the legality of the transaction. When everything was settled, Tommy approached Richard Morgan. "Mr. Richard, thank you for doing the right thing." The man looked at the boy and for the first time in a long while smiled genuinely. "Thank you, son. You taught me it's never too late to make things right." In the days that followed, the Davis family's life changed completely. The land they received was fertile and well located, securing their financial future. Sarah expanded her sewing business, hiring other women from town to help. Tommy continued caring for Thunder, who became not just a pet, but a symbol of justice in the community. The horse, now majestic and healthy, drew everyone's attention. Its grey coat gleamed in the sun, and its movements were graceful and full of dignity. Professor Rebecca organized a celebration at the school where Tommy told his story to all the children. The lesson everyone learned was that courage and determination can overcome any injustice, no matter how powerful the opponent. Joseph Carter was rewarded by the community for his bravery in speaking the truth. Several people helped him set up a small business, recognizing that he had risked a lot to do the right thing. Mrs. Margaret, who had been key to uncovering the truth, earned the special affection of the Davis family. Tommy visited her every day, and she became like a grandmother to him. A month after the case was resolved, the town held a party in honor of the Davis family. It was a day of joy and unity, where everyone celebrated the victory of justice. During the party, Tommy gave a demonstration of Thunder's skills. The horse performed every trick perfectly, drawing enthusiastic applause from the crowd. "This horse is truly special," said the mayor. "He taught us that sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones we almost lose." That night, after all the guests had left, Tommy stayed alone with Thunder in the new stable they had built. "You know, buddy," he said, "when I saw you at that farmer's market, skinny and sick, I never imagined you'd change our lives like this." The horse whinnied softly as if agreeing. "But I think Grandpa knew. I think he somehow made sure we found each other." Tommy hugged the horse's neck, feeling a deep peace in his heart. Months passed, and the story of the boy and the horse spread to other towns. Journalists came from far away to meet Tommy and Thunder, impressed by the courage of a child who stood up to a powerful man to seek justice. The case inspired others to speak out about injustices they had suffered, creating a wave of demands for rights that benefited many families in the region. Richard Morgan, for his part, completely changed his way of doing business. He became known for his honesty and even helped families he had wronged in the past. "That boy taught me a lesson I'll never forget," he once said. "No matter how much money or power you have, if your conscience isn't clear, you'll never be happy." A year later, Tommy had grown a lot and become known in the area as an excellent horse handler. People came from far away to ask for advice on caring for their animals. Thunder became a famous horse not just for his beauty, but for the incredible story he carried. Generous offers were made to buy him, but Tommy always refused. "He's not for sale," he would say. "He's family." Sarah Davis thrived with her sewing business, which had grown into a small workshop. She employed 15 women from town, and her products were sold in several nearby towns. "All of this started with my son's courage," she said proudly. "He taught me that sometimes we have to risk everything for what's right." Their home had changed too. They built a new house on the property they had reclaimed, with a proper stable for Thunder and space for Sarah's sewing workshop. Every afternoon, Tommy would ride Thunder, and the two would take a walk around the family land. It was a special moment when the boy felt a deep connection, not just with the horse, but with the memory of the grandfather he had never met. During one of these rides, on the 1-year anniversary of buying the horse, Tommy decided to visit the cemetery where his grandfather was buried. When they reached William Davis's grave, something extraordinary happened. Thunder, without any command, approached the headstone and lowered his head as if paying his respects. Then, the horse knelt down completely, a show of reverence that deeply moved Tommy. "You remember him, don't you?" whispered the boy, tears in his eyes. "You know he was your first owner." The horse remained kneeling for several minutes as if offering a silent tribute to the man who had raised him with such love. When he finally stood, Tommy hugged his neck tightly. "Thank you, Grandpa," he said, looking up at the sky. "Thank you for sending Thunder to us." The wind blew softly, rustling the cemetery trees, like a tender reply from his grandfather. In that moment, Tommy understood that the story hadn't just been about reclaiming a horse or land. It had been about justice, family, courage, and love. Thunder had come into his life seemingly by chance, but in truth, he had been the instrument for a great life lesson. He taught that even a small child can make a difference when fighting for what's right. He also showed that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as problems. The sick, abandoned horse had become a symbol of family unity and the triumph of justice. When they returned home that afternoon, Sarah was waiting at the gate. "How was your ride?" "It was perfect, Mom," Tommy replied, dismounting. "Thunder did something amazing at Grandpa's grave." He told her about the horse's gesture of respect, and Sarah couldn't hold back her emotions. "Your father always said animals have souls," she said, "and Thunder proved that today." That evening at dinner, they talked about how their lives had changed. "You know what amazes me the most?" Sarah said. "How a decision that seemed so small at the time changed everything." "What decision?" "When you insisted on buying that horse at the farmer's market. I thought you were being stubborn, but really, you were following your heart." "I guess the heart sometimes knows things the mind doesn't understand," Tommy replied with wisdom beyond his years. "It's true. And you taught me to trust my heart more too." 2 years later, Tommy and Thunder's story had become a legend in the region. People told it to their children and grandchildren, always emphasizing the importance of standing up for what you believe in. The Davis family farm thrived. Alongside Sarah's sewing business, they had started breeding horses, with Thunder as their prized stallion. The foals born carried the same nobility and intelligence as their sire and were highly sought after in the area. Tommy, now 11, had grown into a responsible and wise young man. He still personally cared for Thunder, maintaining the special bond they'd shared since day one. The horse, in turn, kept his majesty and dignity. He had become the patriarch of a new lineage, but never lost his special affection for the boy who had saved him. The community of Pleasantville had changed too. The case had united people around values like justice and solidarity. They formed a community council to resolve disputes peacefully, always remembering the example set by the Davis family. Teacher Rebecca wrote a book about the story, which was read in schools across the region. Titled The Boy, the Horse, and Justice, it became an important tool for teaching children about values. Richard Morgan also found his redemption. He became one of the town's biggest supporters of social projects, always saying he wanted to make up for past mistakes. "That boy saved me from myself," he'd say, whenever someone asked about his change of heart. Joseph Carter prospered with his business and became a champion of just causes. Whenever someone was wronged by powerful people, he offered his help, remembering that he had been rewarded for having the courage to speak the truth. Mrs. Margaret, now 78 years old, remained active and healthy. She had become the living memory of the town, always ready to share stories of the past with the younger generations. "Life has taught me that the truth always comes out," she would say. "It may take time, but it always does." One Sunday afternoon, 3 years after buying the horse, the entire community gathered for a big celebration in honor of the anniversary of the victory of justice, as the resolution of the case had come to be known. Tommy gave a special performance with Thunder, showing off new tricks he had taught the horse. The audience watched in awe at the elegant and synchronized movements between the boy and the animal. At the end of the performance, Tommy gave a speech that moved everyone. "When I bought Thunder at that farmer's market, I was just a boy who felt sorry for a sick horse," he said. "I never imagined that decision would change not only my life, but the lives of so many people." He paused, looking at the crowd listening in silence. "What I've learned is that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easiest. But when we act from the heart, when we fight for justice, the universe conspires in our favor." The crowd cheered enthusiastically. "Thunder taught me that every living being deserves a second chance, that with love and care we can turn any situation around." Sarah Davis, watching from the side, cried with pride for her son, who had grown into such a wise and courageous young man. "But the most important lesson," Tommy continued, "is that no matter our age or size, we can all make a difference. We can all be instruments of justice and love." When he finished his speech, Thunder walked up to him and rested his head on his shoulder, as if agreeing with every word. The celebration lasted late into the night, with music, dancing, and great joy. It wasn't just the celebration of one person's story, but of a community that had learned important values through the example of a boy and his horse. That night before bed, Tommy went to the stable to say goodnight to Thunder, as he did every night. "You know, buddy," he said, stroking the horse, "sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if I hadn't bought you at that farmer's market." The horse let out a soft whinny, as if saying the question made no sense. They were meant to find each other. "You're right," Tommy laughed. "I guess no matter what, we would have found each other. Some things are bigger than chance." He hugged the horse's neck one last time that night. "Good night, Thunder. Dream of green pastures and freedom." As he walked back home, Tommy looked up at the starry sky and smiled. He felt his grandfather William was somewhere out there, proud of the grandson he had never met in person, but who had honored his memory so beautifully. The story of the boy who bought a sick horse for $10 and uncovered a secret that changed his life had become more than just a personal tale. It had turned into a symbol of hope for all who believe that justice and love always win in the end. And every evening, as the sun set over Pleasantville, you could see the silhouette of a young man and his horse walking together through the fields, living proof that dreams and determination can turn even the hardest reality into a story of victory and redemption. Thunder had arrived sick and abandoned, but found love, care, and justice. In return, he brought prosperity, family unity, and a life lesson that would be told for generations. Because sometimes, the biggest secrets are hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them and fight for them. The end of the story. And what did you think, dear listener, of this thrilling tale of Tommy Walker Davis and his horse Thunder? Do you believe a child's courage can truly change the fate of an entire family? Share your thoughts in the comments about what touched you most in this story, and if you've ever faced a situation where you had to fight for justice. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. so you won't miss other heartwarming stories.